I'm at the tobacco barn, and this is where the tobacco leaves, after they've been pulled in the field, this is where they come to be put on the sticks. And normally we would have 3 or 4 loopers, and that's what we're actually going to do, loop the tobacco on a string and put it on the stick. And there will be 2 handers, people who will hand the tobacco to the looper, but today we only have 1. So we're going to loop the tobacco onto the stick, and if you notice, this is called a looping horse, and it holds the stick very securely. And these were actually made by the farmer. This is one of the jobs he had after tobacco boarding time was over, to repair and make sure all of his looping horses were ready for next year. We also have tobacco string, and this is a very thick type of string that you buy in a 24-pack from the local farm supply store. First thing we do is actually loop our string around the stick. We make a loop, put it on the stick, and the end that is not attached to the ball, we pull it around, and we're ready to begin. Each handful of tobacco will be about 3 leaves if they're rather large, the way these are today. And the requirement is to have the ends neatly compact so that it'll go on the stick easily. And the looper puts her hand around the bundle, the 3-leaf bundle, and she loops it around. That's what you actually do, loop it around. An expert looper could work much faster than one person could hand, and a really expert looper would keep 2 handers busy. And what we would do, we keep going toward the tobacco stick full of tobacco. And one of the things we have to be careful about is not to get it too thick, because after this process it's going into the barn to be cured, and the hot air must be able to work its way through each leaf and cure each one of these rather large stems. So we'll be curing the tobacco after we loop it. And let us imagine that the stick is full. Now we're in business because we have 2 handers, and that will keep one looper busy. While the men in the field are cropping the tobacco, the ladies that are looping and handing, they're also training the children to be handers, because that was the child's job. And it's a rite of passage for handers to graduate to being loopers. When you've done that, you've grown up. So that was every girl who had the barn tobacco's ambition. The next summer she might get to be a looper. Now while about 12 o'clock every day, while the family stopped what they were doing, the croppers came out of the field, they all gathered at the barn shelter, and the looper would tie up her stick wherever she was because it was lunchtime. One of the things the children would do while the dinner was being prepared was they'd go around and pick up the leaves, and they would practice looping. And that's how they learned to do it, playing around while the parents weren't at the feet, were through with the work for the day, and they were at the house taking an afternoon rest. And lunch would be about an hour. There'd be an hour to eat and an hour just to lay down or sit under the shade tree. And then it was back to the field. Late in the afternoon, when all the tobacco that's going to be barned that day has been brought from the field and put on sticks by the women and children, then we're ready to hang it in the barn. And the tobacco is going to hang in the barn for about a week at various temperatures. And to cure. So the last chore of the day was to go to the racks where all the tobacco had been hanging, and the women and children would lift it up into the barn, or bring it to the barn, and it would be lifted up to the men who were hanging in the rafters. They had rafters, and each man, they would have a man on top and a man on the bottom. And the man at the very top of the tiers would hang, and the tiers would progress full as they came and filled each rafter. And this is how the tobacco was hung. By the time the barn was full, you could see it from the doorway.
I'm just gonna.
The barn would be full of leaves, full of sticks. They had to be careful to keep the leaves from touching any of the heat apparatus, so they were well protected and covered. And periodically, when the barn is curing, the farmer will come 2 or 3 times a day and check his barn for fallen leaves that might catch on fire while the tobacco is curing. And he would also come 2 or 3 times a day to check the temperature of the barn. And the heat would progress up to around 160 degrees before the tobacco became ripe or totally cured. After being in the barn and curing for about a week, the tobacco reaches a highest temperature of somewhere around 160 degrees, and it should come out looking pretty, this golden leaf. And this is the very best grade. But before the farmer could prepare it for the selling, they had to grade his tobacco and pick out the very best leaves for grade 1. And then we had 2nd grades and 3rd grades, depending on the farmer and how he wanted to do it. So we're going to grade some of this tobacco. And you can see this is not the bright golden leaf, so we're going to make it 2nd grade. And the very 1st grade, we have bins available. Now keep in mind, this work was probably done in a pack house. Sometimes if it was really hot and the farmer had enough space under his barn, they could do it under the barn where the breeze was blowing and it was more pleasant. So the farmer usually was the one who did the grading, and his wife and children would do the tying. So we have some 2nd grade tobacco here. Now keep in mind, when we grade it and put it in the bin, we want to keep the stems toward us because that's going to be very important in getting the job done quickly. Because when the tobacco market opens, if the prices are good, we want to have our product ready. Now this golden leaf, these pretty leaves, besides being the most precious, the most high-priced tobacco, it also is used to tie up the others because it's in very good shape. Now we're going to demonstrate, after all the tobacco has been graded into 1, 2, or 3 grades, we're going to demonstrate now how to tie the tobacco. And this usually fell to the children and the wife, because the farmer would be doing the grading and deciding on where each leaf should fall in the value process. So, all the stems have to be level, and that's why it was very important for the farmer when he was having it graded or grading it himself to get the stems relatively in order and smooth. And we take about a handful of tobacco and we tie it in a bundle. It's important that the farmer keep the grades separate, because if he had a lot of trash tobacco in his 2nd grade or 1st grade, then it would devalue the product. So we try to keep the grades together. And and have as much good grade and second grade as we could. With about a handful of tobacco, then we have to pick our leaf for tying because it's all tied together. And one of the things the children had to do was to learn to tie a pretty tobacco leaf. Because if you didn't, the farmer would certainly take you to task for it. So you take one, and while the tobacco's in your hand, you take one bundle and one leaf, and you press it over to the side, kind of divide it in half, with a little bit coming over the stem. And then you divided it back. So you ended up with this pretty wrapper. Beginning at the top, you tie it around and you keep grabbing it with your hand to make sure you keep it tight. And you go around, and then when you get this far, with the stems tightly wrapped, you separate the tied tobacco in the middle, you stick the remainder of the leaf through, and you kind of tighten it up. Now if you had too much stem protruding, your father probably would make you untie it and redo it. Because back in the day, it was very important for the tobacco to be pretty. Obviously, the people who bought it counted that. They counted how neatly the tobacco was brought into the market. And it was important to a farmer. It was a matter of pride for him to have it uniform and the color looking as best.